This is Ken Williams of Unfold the Soul. Welcome you to the StatusGrow podcast. Let me tell you, this is going to be real talk focused on disrupting the status quo, baby. So, are you ready? Get set, and let's grow with your hosts, Paul O'Neill and Corey Radish.
I got to thank Ken Williams for that great introduction. Welcome to the second ever Status Grow podcast. I'm Corey. He's Paul. We are excited to bring episode number 2. We have a phenomenal guest waiting in the wings, but my buddy Paul, I would be remiss if I didn't publicly congratulate you on your Buccaneers Super Bowl championship. I know for you, it's been a long time coming. You know, being a fan of the Bucs has been trying, but you made it to the mountaintop last Sunday. How you feeling, pal?
I'm feeling wonderful, Corey. Thank you so much. It's great to be back. Status Grow episode 2. So excited to introduce our guest in a few minutes. But folks, I've been saying to friends and family, I'll be on cloud 9 if you need me. My feet haven't touched the ground. They probably won't until next preseason. You know, we ride that championship out for quite a while. The last time they won was my daughter was just born. It was 18 years ago, and life was different, much younger man. You never know how many you're going to see. You know, not a lot of teams are as successful as the Patriots or even your Giants, Corey. You've seen a few, you know, but Tampa Bay, 18 years between championships. I got a Super Bowl jersey with a little logo on it, so I'll be wearing that a little bit. Bring that out to the folks at Camp Blitz in Woodbridge next year, and I'm just stoked, man. Totally stoked.
Yeah, it's when you are a fanatic of a team and, you know, you live and die with every play, every call, every go for it on fourth down, hoping they make it. When you see that clock hit 000 and you got that championship, it's, it's something special. And, as a Giant fan, we have been lucky. We always want to be greedy and win it every year. But I think for the most part, I think we average like once every 5-6 years we're in the Super Bowl, starting in '86. So, if somebody said if you root for a team and sign up for that ratio, would you take it? I think I would take it, every single time. But it's been since 2011 for us Giant fans, so it's going. We're getting up there now. We don't want to get to that decade mark and not have another one. But we'll see what Joe Judge and Daniel Jones can muster up in the upcoming season. But something that really struck me, and this wasn't just from this Super Bowl. This was, I think it was from the last time the Patriots won the Super Bowl. Tom Brady was asked in a post-game interview which one is his favorite ring. And this dude, without hesitation, said the next one. And I started to think to myself, and that's why you got you get my Monday emails. That's why I started to think to myself, how can I relate Tom Brady's work ethic into what we do in education? And just for him to say the next one, it was all about the process. You bring that up all the time, that, it's not about the destination, it's about the process. But to hear him say that, was really something special.
It was. I'm going to open with this and say, our guest is a little bit of a suffering fan as well. So we might want to keep it light on football once we get there. He's a Jets fan, and, same division as Brady used to be for a while. So we're not going to get a lot of, congratulations from him. Not too much. Hopefully his team will win soon enough. But, yeah, it's interesting you bring that up. People talk a lot about Tom Brady's work ethic and his process and things like that. He doesn't spend a whole lot of time celebrating before he gets back to business. And that's something that I think a lot of us, especially in leadership, we spend more time focused on the next fire, as opposed to celebrating something that went well. I know those of you that are on social media probably saw that Tom did celebrate maybe a little too much over the weekend, had some adult beverages, as they like to call them. And he made probably the most important pass of his career, which is one I don't condone. I don't think it's a good look, but he did what he did. Threw the Lombardi across the bay, and luckily shorthanded Cameron Brate came down with the catch, and we didn't have to get the scuba gear out to retrieve the Lombardi trophy. But it is interesting because the process is key. The process and how we do things, and our systems in place are very important, and they're very important to continue to review over time to make sure that we're letter tight, and we're efficient. And maybe sometimes that changes. Maybe you are letter tight and efficient, but conditions have changed, so you've got to look at things. There was a joke about Brady they were talking about, and they said, how long will it be before he starts reaching out to the receivers and getting them back in play? And they just won the Super Bowl. And some aggressive people were saying Thursday. By Thursday, he was going to be ready to roll for next season. It didn't end up being until Saturday, but he's ready, man. Like, the celebration is over. They're champs, but at the same time, the preparation begins now for something that's not going to be, kicking off again for another 7 months.
Yeah, and it just goes to show, you can hate him all you want, and I know our guest probably does. I didn't realize he was a Jets fan, so my sympathies to him, and just so he knows, I'm not a Giant fan that hates the Jets. I had a best friend growing up, and he was a Jet fan, and we agreed to root for each other unless we played each other. But you think about the process and culture and status quo, right? And if you think about it in relationship to the Jets, hopefully they found their coach now who's going to dismantle the system that created the Jets' ineptitude, right? And bring in a culture now that is gonna be about status grow. And going back to Brady, and you think about that process and adapting, 20 years in the league, he's been in 10 Super Bowls, which is 18% of all Super Bowls. And he has done it with, some people say not a lot of talent, and now you saw him do it with a lot of talent. So he is somebody who can adjust with the times and take the information at hand to do what's best for his program, his organization, and that's kind of what our guest does, right? Our guest will come in and help you look at your systems in a certain way that will help you to do exactly what this show is all about, which is challenge that status quo. So, Paul, why don't you do the honors of introducing the second ever guest on the Status Grow podcast?
The second ever guest. We're so excited to have this gentleman with us. I'm going to read from his Twitter profile, Corey. He is a man of God, a husband, a father, a CEO of Gomo Ed Services. He's a keynote speaker, former Rutgers IISA director, a CAO, former principal, teacher at heart, because he is always a teacher. He is an AR VR member and also a proud EduMatch author. So, Status Grow Nation, please help me welcome the one and only Dr. Jose Gonzalez.
Thank you. You're welcome. Thank you.
Corey, we are so excited to have you on here. We're going to talk in a little bit that we were in the same space, coincidentally, this week, which was, for me an honor to be in that same space. But anybody that knows you knows, the passion. And then we had the same thing with our first. Your passion for bringing to light the inequities in organizations, but do it in a way that people feel as comfortable as possible, because they're not always comfortable conversations. We know that. But for the way that you do it and to, make people feel so comfortable, I got to tell you, this is a privilege to have you on the show.
Wow. Thank you for having me. It's a privilege for me to be here. It's an honor for me to be here.
You're welcome. I want to say you're welcome, my friend, but you are our friend, so you're welcome, our friend. I want to start here. This is the easiest place to start for me, because it's really an interesting story, and Status Grow Nation needs to hear the story. So I met you in 2017 at an ed camp, and I can remember very well walking up to you after your session, and I was like, man, I'm moved. Like, you did an amazing job, and what was talked about with equity, really made me challenge the way I think and the way I'm not thinking. But the interesting story I want to share to open up is when I walked up and shook your hand back when we could shake hands, I introduced myself to you, and when you introduced yourself back, you said, my name is Josh Falaise, and that's not the way your name is pronounced anymore. So can you talk to us a little bit about that and give us a little history behind that story? Because that's an interesting story.
Sure. Now, it goes back to from birth that I was born as Josue Falaise. However, growing up, family, friends, and even educators had difficulty and discomfort calling me by Josue Falaise. So all Americans. So they found the English equivalent, which is the anglicized version, and just changed my name to Joshua. And Falaise has always been Falaise, but again, anglicized version. Let's anglicize it and make it Americanized, and then call me Falaise. I became so embarrassed at people having discomfort that I actually wrote my name as Josh or Joshua from third grade to my freshman year of college. Then I realized I have to be more of this the government name. Then that's when I actually started writing Josue out. The work that I was doing at Rutgers for so long was teaching training on cultural competency, keeping your identity, restorative practice, restorative justice. But then, as I'm training on the cultural competency, I'm telling people to never let them take away your cultural identity. Yet, that's exactly what I was basically perpetuating. And I was in that space. In certain spaces, I'd be Josue, for those that could say it, and in other spaces, I would be Josh. And sometimes they would mingle. So you have someone calling me Josue, another person calling me Josh, and it's like, but your name is Josue. How did you get Josh? I'm like, well, that's the anglicized version. And after just deliberating over time and feeling uncomfortable, and I'm like, I need to be the same person, so I'm speaking what I'm presenting and preaching. And that's why November 11th, 2019, after basically being tired, there's still more things, but being so tired, I said, I'm going to be one person in every single space. And regardless of who you know, how you've known me, how long you've known me, you're all going to call me Josue Falaise. So that's why I require everyone now to call me that name, not Dr. J, Dr. Ev, J. Ev, which people are trying to now. It's like, can I abbreviate it? And unfortunately, there are people who have decided that they no longer wish to call me or call me Josue at all, and they've decided on their own to sever the friendship just because they refuse to call me by my name. It's happening regularly.
Wow.
Well, that is unbelievable. That the shallowness of people. And here I am, as Paul will tell you, that I have practiced on Voxer with Paul, and if anybody, it's okay to, and you let them know, Josue, that it's okay to struggle, to try to pronounce it out of respect for your identity. And I think that, the best thing that you did was pinned that tweet to your Twitter profile that shows and shares the story and shows people how to pronounce that name. Because if you think about it, think about it as a kid growing up, and we change their identity in school, and we kind of, and I saw a quote today. I was at a workshop for Oregon RTI, did a workshop today, and the keynote presenter, Hamlin, I think was his last name. And he said, there's a difference between being educated and getting schooled. And, I think about all the kids who may have names that are difficult to pronounce, who don't get a chance to share their identity because we're too busy schooling everybody into one way of looking at something. So I appreciate that you've done that. And, what are your thoughts about that quote and what we do to kids who, when they lose their identity like that?
It goes back to these structures, as far as, like you said, the purpose of StatusGrow is to go against from the status quo. And those are considered like the norms that we've been operating for, European colonizing way. But we now realize that to address the different cultures, we have to get to know people. I mean, relationships, individuals, and get to know about their cultures, and that we can actually value, appreciate, and even honor, because it enhances us as a community, as individuals, but even more so as a nation. So when you deny that, you're denying yourself an opportunity to grow. Again, that's the purpose of StatusGrow.
We couldn't agree more. There's a saying that denial is more than just a river in Egypt, right? But denial can be a very real thing, when people talk about issues that they don't think they have. So this is a question that I've thought about a lot. You and I have talked about it both publicly and privately, but I would love for our listeners to hear you mention, what do you say to people who say, that we don't have equity problems in our district, or we don't have equity problems in our school or our community or our town, because there are people that say that. So, we're status grow, so we're not going to go with the status quo that we don't have those problems just because we're not a diverse, ethnic group.
And where I used to hear that is I would travel to different type of committees and councils, depending on the level of executive level type of meetings and committees and councils I would go to. In some spaces, I would be the only person of color stepping in, trying to let them know and market and solicit equity work. But I've been explicitly told, we're all white here. We don't have any equity issues, explicitly. So you can go. Thank you very much. And they're not seeing as far as like the difference between equality and equity, but even more so, equity is more than just race. That's what people aren't seeing, and it's based on need. So that's what GOMO does, is actually debunk and demystify the misconstruence between equity and equality. So that's what, as we go deeper and deeper, as far as like defining what educational equity is and defining things about culture, your operation of culture. So that's what they end up needing. So in some cases, they deny, and then like now we're seeing a moment where districts are and people are being pushed. They're being held accountable. Like, we're not doing certain things just because the adults may be all white, the students are not. So, but culture and equity, because you can still be the white skin and have all these other cultures, European, different cultures that are there represented. You could be South African and white. So what are you saying then? That person's South African. So these are things that we need to look at. And then there's power struggles within there. And when we're looking at different cultures, and that also impedes on the addressing of equity because of certain positions of power. And I know you both are administrators, and these are things that we try to help districts with and support, because if you have that power and you're not working to address the different needs, let's say the people who are subordinates that are there trying to work their way up to help you be receptive towards this is a need. If you're not aware or choose not to, you're denying the same thing that you say according to your mission, your vision, and your motto, which goes against everything we're there for.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point, and I think it would be more important for predominantly all white districts to have conversations about equity, about race, so that they're educated, right, and not make the veil assumption, because I don't see people that look differently than me, therefore I do not need to learn about this. I think that's kind of dangerous, in fact, to operate with a practice like that. And to be honest with you, there's always issues of equity regardless of the organization. So you could look at your economically disadvantaged compared to your economically advantaged. You can look at, maybe why are the females outperform. I was just working with 2 schools this past week, and their females were super outperforming the males. I asked, has that ever been a question as to why are females outperforming males in your school? So there's we've said it before, equity is so large, right? But we tend to reduce it just to race, and that, I think that's a dangerous thing to do, especially for homogeneous schools.
True. And also when we look at the word culture, that's something that, like, I was training a district today on culture, and a new district today and a new district on Friday. Many people tend to deem the word culture. First thing comes to mind is it's race. No, it's deeper than race. It's more complex. How we define it is values, beliefs, your experience. These things all guide culture. So these are things that we train on to support them to kind of understand that it's a deeper thing than just a superficial thing about culture, superficial level about equity.
Yeah, that's it. I read on Twitter, in a Twitter chat one day, a teacher who taught predominantly Hispanic students, right? So there are many cultures within the Hispanic population. And so she did a really cool exercise where she asked them to describe the rice that they cook in their homes, because different culinary um, traits are different amongst the Hispanics. So where one may use yellow rice, some may use white rice, some are putting black beans, some are putting red beans. So she wanted to get to understand their culture, and I thought that was a fantastic way of saying, hey, I want to know about you, right? I want to know about your family so that I can learn about you and then maybe incorporate that down the road as we get into the school year.
That's absolutely great. And in trying to be culturally responsive, that's what this teacher is moving towards. And obviously, there's just the beginning, and I'm pretty sure she does even more, even greater things to be able to really incorporate the responsiveness in the classroom, in the pedagogy, and in the curriculum. But we also look at when you said that people say they don't see color. That's something that we call basically culturally blind. When you look at the culture proficiency continuum, that's a dangerous area that you still are oppressing people and causing these microaggressions because you're choosing to be blind. So if we want to be awoken, so we can grow, open your eyes and start looking to be aware of different cultures.
That's a great point, Dr. Velez. You mentioned something about culture before, and culture is a collection of experiences. It's a collection of data, if you will, that we get from so many different areas. And, Corey and I mentioned in the first podcast, he works for the state. I work for Lacey Township. And, those are just two current cultures that we're in. But our experiences that we bring to the StatusGrow podcast are not indicative of our current positions, or necessarily indicative of our past positions. They're a mishmash, they're a cornucopia, if you will, of all different experiences that we've had. And we hopefully use those to grow. Now, I want to talk to you about, we decided to have you as our second guest. Recently you and Corey ended up doing work earlier this week together. Talk to us a little bit about, the recent event and some of the takeaways that you had from the event. I'm sure Corey will want to share some as well.
Sure. I was asked to speak on, so it was keynote speaking as well as an actual workshop. The keynote was on advocating for a anti-racist school system. So it was letting them see the history of how race has always been embedded. I mean, from the 14th century, where the earliest manuscripts identify race and the gap, and how we even assess towards that. So I gave them a quick assessment of an IQ and how it's culturally unfair, culturally distant, and why create gaps, and how it's been used. I gave them a little history, some research. Then I went deeper into how New Jersey has had this racist system, and we didn't go too deep, but it just gave them a knowledge about enough things to say that New Jersey is racist, and we're showing you how it's in the courts, it's in the news. You can't deny it, and this is just one article, one news things, and then I talked about how we've been divided and segregated, de facto segregation. I went further into explaining how they can interrogate their systems practices from the student aspect and even the adult aspect. Because with students, obviously, do you have an adult that represents the students' different backgrounds and cultures? But even with staff, where many people are looking to hire, organizations, they're hiring staff now, and in some cases, just let me put a Black person in the DEI position, diversity, equity, inclusion, and they're just saying, here, you do the work. But then there's no actionable plan and long-term plan to be able to support that person in some cases. They're looking for them to be the alleged savior, and it may not work out. So I remember one district that I've done a lot of work with, they have no job, they have no problem bringing in diverse people in all levels. The challenge they're having is they're not keeping them. So there's a problem, there's no plan. So how are you doing that to support that person in there? As well as if you're hiring these individuals, especially of different cultures and backgrounds, are they represented in all of the tiers, your hierarchy, your org chart? Is it all at the bottom, just a teacher, paraprofessional, bus, or they have opportunities to move into administration? Again, these are things that people are looking for so they can better be able to benefit everyone. There's all this research that shows that people of color, regardless of what district they go to, everyone improves. So why are we all doing that? We choose to be homogeneous in certain areas. And then I just, for everyone, I now provided next steps, like tangible steps that they can start doing now, like, creating a platform to hear the harm, because you could work with someone for 10, 20 years because there was this delineation as far as work is work, and there's been oppression at work, but because you know, in some cases you fight to keep your job, so you got to keep your mouth shut. But not if you're leaving the opportunity for me to speak as far as what's going on. I want to talk. So I talked about, you know, being vulnerable and listening to people being vulnerable. I remember just today I was speaking to someone about. I've had friends since George Floyd incident for almost 3 months, and I'm talking almost every single day. A white friend has come to me and says, "Please speak to me about this racist thing because I don't get it, and I know that you won't like make fun of me or vilify me because I don't know." Every day for literally 3 months, and doing presentations and everything else from churches and everything. So when people are being vulnerable, you can actually receive them better, and then you know they'll actually listen to you. As far as like, I can't believe I was unaware. Um, I bring this to the afternoon session where the it was discussed on, the title was having real difficult and courageous conversations around race-based privileges. Now, what I was told, there was over 100 people signed up for the session, out of a district with 233 people that showed up for the day. So that's, you know, a little more than half. That, and so they had to decrease the numbers. But we went and I guess some people may have assumed like I'm going to come in and start yelling and cursing and this black people this and white people that. But I designed it in a way where initially they started reading the book, a chapter of the book White Privilege. It gave it as an analogy from a hiking perspective with tools, location, and access and resources to different things. And then it allowed you to see from a different perspective what is going on in our country and our system. So people didn't look at the story as a white privilege versus, you know, black disadvantaged. This is just what we see here. And it's like, and you should, literally almost everyone said, I got it. I had no idea. And we just went even deeper, asking questions. I asked higher order questions. I left open to a number of things they may have had, and they discussed it within the parameters of the questions, but I guided it. I remember even ending late. 70 people stayed 10, 15 minutes late because they said it was that eye-opening, but their hearts were even opened. And that's what the work is. You cannot grow if your heart is not open to change and even a new experience, so that you can actually really help people. You know, let's not even forget the kids. People, human beings. That's what we're looking to do. Grow you so we can grow them.
Yeah, and the thing that, well, there's so many things that stick out to me in what you just said, but I go back to right after Paul asked you the question. You said, "Well, we didn't go too deep." Don't let him fool you, Paul. He went deep, and he did it. Like I said, he does it in such a way where I really think a lot of people had epiphanies, honestly, like because he teaches it in the context of really the heart and what it does when we have systemic racism, what it does to people. And for the majority of people, they're good people out there, and they don't want to hurt people. They just sometimes don't know. So, like I said, it was a privilege to share that space and be able to refer to his keynote. And, you know, those who weren't in his afternoon session, I guess they were in my session, because, you know, I had some of the same experiences that that you had. I'd use Dr. Fergus's beliefs activity. I've shared this before. I turned it into a Jamboard, and I had them, you know, put it so you see a visual of, you know, some of the belief statements. And one of them, I created my own that said, if I admit I have bias, people will think I'm racism, so I'd rather not talk about it. And it was overwhelmingly people in the last two times I've done this with you and the district we worked with on Monday, and I also did it on this Friday. That would have been on the 12th, because when this airs, it won't be yesterday. It was overwhelmingly people saying, yes, if I admit I have bias, people will think I'm racist. And you try to get to the core that we all have bias, right? But can you recognize that bias and then make your adjustments accordingly? And a lot of people don't make that adjustment, and it becomes ingrained in their thought process, and that's how procedures. So when you say New Jersey is racist, there'll be people listening that are going to get offended, And they don't realize we're not saying that the people of New Jersey necessarily are racist, but the procedures, our policies, our systems are racist because they still keep some things that oppress people and put people at a disadvantage. The other question that I created on the belief statement uh, was if that do you think schools should add more discussions about race, class, and gender? And when I tell you it's 90% yes to no, and then when we ask, are you having the conversations? It's overwhelmingly no. And I think that's where GOMO would really suit, schools and your services because you you make the introduction to the uncomfortable palatable. And I think that when people sit in your audience, they realize, wait a second, he's not pointing a finger, he's not pointing an admonishing finger at people who may have biased thoughts or even racist thoughts. But he wants to let us know that if we can challenge our own thinking, our students are going to benefit, and in turn, we all benefit. Would you agree with that statement?
That is correct. And the start of the norms that I said be prepared to, like there are going to be facts that are presented. These are facts that anyone can fact check. And what Corey's saying, I went a little deep. The depth was with everything I presented that I talked about facts. I showed you where the resource you can actually go to. So I kept saying, I challenge you to challenge me. And that, like, it opens a whole new door. Like, hold on a second. So I can just go on online myself and see the fact as far as what he's presenting is true. And that's where it's there's a stamp. There's that gavel just going down like Clint. And also, I want to talk about the systemic racism, like in New Jersey. This is where like how even highways were formed. You can go find, just search it. Housing. I was just dealing with a home in someone just dealt a home recently in about December 2020 in Monmouth County, New Jersey. Black person tried to purchase a home. Neighbors around the area did not want the person to purchase the home, so they put enough money, purchased a home, so this black person wouldn't live there. That's the sort of things that are going on. That's what I'm saying. So it's not even individuals, it's the systems and the structures that allows that to happen. And like one of our trainings, we actually show you the evidence of redlining with actual documentation. You could see where they're saying Jews are not accepted here, or they're starting to move in. Put the blacks over there. We do these kind of things so that how can you justify that? Say that it's not facts from 1950s or 1940s. We work with that to see that to show you that these things exist and there is no denying it. We've kind of pushed it to the side so people don't know. Now with all this access, there is no denying it.
You know, one of the things I think about too that often gets thrown into this conversation is another word, and that word's called privilege. And I was having a conversation with a friend recently, and we were talking about equity, and we were talking about the many different layers of equity, you know, because as you talked about before, there's class, there's gender, there's socioeconomic status, there's so many other things that are other than just race. And when I brought up the term privilege for a discussion, the conversation took a turn. And the conversation took a turn for the worse because the person I was talking to said, what do you mean I'm privileged? Like, I've worked for everything that I've ever had. I've never been given anything. How dare you say that I'm privileged? Saying I'm privileged means you don't understand my story and you're making everything about race. And I said, whoa. I said, let's walk that comment back a little bit. And, you know, we ended up in a better place than we arrived. But can you talk about that a little bit? Because I'm sure you face that in organizations that you work with a little bit when the topic of privilege comes up. And you know, the discussion becomes, I believe you said it was courageous, you know, and hard conversations, real talk, right? Talk about what that conversation sounds like when, you know, people assume that when the word privilege is brought up, that it's a direct attack on them and the fact that they're not working hard enough or that they've been given stuff.
So the morning session and Corey's session, I think Ken's session, there was someone else that came that were all presenters. The way that the session, everything from start was designed was so that people had baby steps throughout the day to receive information. So with the keynote giving you facts about the systemic racism happening in their state, and even in our system, I went even the nation, and then drilled it backwards as far as steps you can do. And then the sessions throughout the day, which discussed, went deeper, went emotional, heart. My session was more as far as like, you didn't know it. Here's an example outside of even race, because again, race is usually one of them, but there's privileges through everything, being a male. Because at that point, you have a dominant group and a dominated group. So men in some spaces are dominated, are dominant, whereas maybe if it's a genderism challenge, it would be females will be the dominated group. So that's a privilege being a male. Same thing with a heterosexual system versus a homosexual system. There's again the heterosexual be dominant, and the homosexual may be the dominated. So it goes back and forth, and those are called the isms. Racism, classism, ableism, against different abled bodies, religionism, genderism, so heterosexism, like all these isms. So look at a dominated group versus a dominated group, or dominant group versus dominated group, and then the dominant group has that privilege. Because when it, like right now, as a black male, and I'm dealing maybe another black female or person of female of color, I may be considered part of that dominant group, so I will have privilege over her depending on which space it is, and most likely in most spaces because of that. So it's important to bring to light that these things exist, and it's not just race. It's all these different isms, and depending on the space you occupy and what the purpose is there is usually, because we set up these systems, winners and losers. We have in our country that there is a group that has privilege versus other group who's disadvantaged. So what I did was in the session, I polled everyone first. How many people actually believe that if you are white, you automatically have an advantage over you? And then I even asked everyone that was white for the session, do you actually consider the privilege you have when you want something and expect it? And then there's another group of people that are experiencing disadvantage. That was iffy. But then there was about 2 people that thought that there was no such thing as white privilege out of 70. Doesn't exist.
I mean, they're out there. We know that. Paul, you bring up a good point about the reaction of the word privilege, and how people misconstrue that it makes it seem like they're born with a silver spoon in their mouth, and everything has been easy. Nowhere in the word privilege and what we're talking about does it say your life has been easy. And I don't think that there's any group that would disagree that there's difficulty in everybody's life. I remember a Facebook post from somebody who, as all the posts were coming out after George Floyd, made a comment about privilege, and it was something about how many hours a day they work, their bills, this, child support, whatever it may be. And they said, I'm just not buying it, kind of like the conversation that you had with that person. And so I said, well, here's the thing. Those are difficult things, but the color of your skin has never made it more difficult. And he came back with, you know what? You're right. I never thought of it like that. And that's what I try to explain to my own children. That's what I try to explain in my workshops. And even when I'm working with schools and we're looking at data of the most marginalized kids, which are usually students of color. And have to understand these terms and terminology in order to educate yourself to create change and dismantle that status quo. So, where we have a couple people in your session, and then your person didn't, you do get those people who then start to understand. I mean, Paul, from our Coffee EDU space that there's some people in another book discussion, and after they did read White Fragility, they had this sense of overwhelming understanding about how, even maybe getting a mortgage may be a privilege compared to a person of color. You may not see it because you may not see a person of color, not get the mortgage, but it's out there. And those things are the things that continue that a lot of white people, and listen, we don't sugarcoat on Status Grow, that a lot of white people don't want to accept and don't want to hear. And this goes back to, and I just had this conversation, that there are a lot of white people who felt when Obama became president that was the end. That was the end of any kind of, class warfare, race war, anything that you want to call it. And right, checking the box, right? It was done. We got that. But as monumental and historic, and this is a tweet, as historic as that presidency was, our systems still haven't really changed, right? If we look at our discipline data, it hasn't really changed. You look at our incarceration data, it still hasn't really changed. So, Josue, can you talk a little bit about, how long does it take, like, to infiltrate, and I don't mean to use infiltrate in a bad way, but infiltrate, because you're really infiltrating people's mindsets. How long does it really take when Gomo comes in to really kind of change the landscape for what you want as the outcome?
It varies on school districts. So I really try to work with districts that are committed. Because if you're going to say you just want a one-shot deal, as Paul said, that check, it doesn't work. Creating a system of services that's going to really be impactful. So one thing that, regardless of what I step in to do, whether restorative practice, SCL, whatever it is, I have to work with getting your district on cultural competency, seeing more than that it's just about race. That starts opening the doors to many different things, because we go over the different types of biases, a challenge to other cultures. Like, we really work on a lot of relationship dynamics, SEL strategies. We still restorative practice work. That's the start of it and the principles of that. So that leads into many other things that we could support you with. So it's having your minds, eyes, and hearts open. That is what makes it easier to do the work. So like today, working at a school district, first time working with the school district, and it was so well received. Again, we went over a little time, but 100% of the people stayed in. Even the superintendent, he was preparing for a board meeting and was like, "This means that much to me." He stayed the whole entire time. Stayed engaged as much as he was. A number of different breakout groups during that session. That's the reason why I always ask for superintendents to be present. I learned more about staff members I've been working for 10 years than I never did than today. And that's what the start is, so you can actually better appreciate people and their cultures and what they bring than anything else. And it could be just breakout groups, but then creating those dynamics for those breakout groups is what Gomo does to be able to start relationships in those type of questions and activities that are hands-on. So you also discussed a point where you're also changing some things that it may have been like hanging in your head or heart for a while. So it's like, so what, we just got to be able to push it. And that happened last week with the school district. They had, we work on our breakout groups, just looking at the link or impact between culture and bias. And someone, a white woman in there, and I go between breakout rooms to check on how things are going, on her own said, I came to the realization after a number of things since George Floyd, and I've had to read and watch videos and documentaries, that I'm an unintentional racist. Now, this is about a 50-something-year-old white woman, blonde hair. She looked, very upper middle class, just perception. And I'm like, hold on a second. I'm not going to skip. I want to hear more. And she got on, and to further state to her group, was like, and every white person is a racist. And she went on to further articulate why. Because of the systemic racism that's been said, and the advantages and disadvantages. And she said, I stand by it. I dare anyone to challenge me. And these are kind of people that we need as allies or co-conspirators so we can make the change, because she says now, and I didn't even realize it, that I raised my children to be racist. Talk about someone's touching their heart. So we went back into the main session after the time was done. And I just said that someone had like an epiphany and talked about how their life changed and realizing, I never mentioned the word race. Do you know this woman said that it was me. I want to speak, and said it was me that had the change. And I said to my group that I didn't realize that I was unintentional racist until last year. The whole dynamic of that, I'm like, I didn't talk about race. It was all about culture, but it changed all that. And as a result, people felt safe to start sharing. And that's the sort of thing that we need. Who's going to step it up? Doesn't always have to be the leader, but if the leader is accepting it to come in and people see that they can be create safe spaces so they can be brave and have these kind of conversations, it'll happen even faster. And then the next thing is follow through, conviction. If it's not being done, how are we holding people accountable, but also supporting them when they take risks and it doesn't work? So all these components, it's not just one unidimensional way, but it's all these dynamics. But leadership is going to be key in supporting those people that really want it and take risks.
I'll tell you what, we have a moment on the podcast. We call it the Status Grow moment. And you created that at a few times throughout. You gave us the keys. You gave us the keys to the castle. I don't even think you realized. So you talked to us about what it takes, the magic formula. And it's baby steps and it's conviction, and it's a commitment. This work is not for, those with the light stomach. You've got to be committed to doing this. And, walking in there and making bold statements is probably going to shut the doors for a lot of people, shut the minds, shut the hearts off. And we can't have that. So, we can't talk around it because there's some realities that we need to acknowledge. But at the same time, the delivery is key, and I think that's my biggest takeaway is that, very well thought out, very well planned, and positioned in a way that, helps the audience raise awareness. And Corey, I just want to add one more thing before we wrap it up. So I was asked a question recently, and the person that asked me the question said, Paul, have you ever thought about the time of day that you left your house to drive somewhere and wondered, is this a safe time to leave my house, or do I run the risk of being pulled over? So, wow. And this person's a good friend, so they didn't let me off the hook with that. They said, have you ever thought about the outfit that you're wearing when you leave the house in relation to you might get pulled over, so maybe you shouldn't wear this? And then they really hit me in the gut with this one. And they said, Paul, did you ever think about the route you were going to take to go somewhere and worry about maybe I should take a different route because I can get pulled over? And folks, I'm not making that a race thing, and I'm not making that a race thing. That can be a race thing. That can be a gender thing. That can be an age thing. That can be a class thing. That can be an ableism thing, that exists for everybody. So that was just a powerful takeaway, Corey, I wanted to share that I thought our listeners and the group here would appreciate.
Can I add one thing? So there's a quote that I saw on Twitter. I can't remember who authored it, but sticks and stones can break your bones, but stereotypes can kill me.
Yeah, that is, people hear that and be like, oh, what are you talking about? And you just don't realize that, it's out there. I mean, it's out there that, making an assumption because a kid's wearing a hood, right? That all of a sudden that's a criminal activity is about to take place because a kid's in a freaking hood, right? I mean, we say we've come a far way, but we still have so far to go. And Paul, my last point, and then we'll let you bring it home and let Josue get some final words and talk a little bit about where we can contact him for Gomo. And what you made me think about, Paul, was a quote from Peggy McIntosh. Now, I don't really know who Peggy McIntosh is. I remember reading this big, long paper called White Privilege Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack. I don't know if you've ever seen that. And in it, she has a quote, and I'm going to read it to you so I don't botch it. And I think this is something that white people need to hear to truly understand, even just encapsulating this conversation in the StatusGrow podcast, episode number 2. Here it is. I was taught to see racism only in individual acts of meanness, not in invisible systems conferring dominance on my group. Just let that sink in for a second. And I will be vulnerable and tell you that, and I shared this on Monday when we were in the same place with my audience, that, I grew up in a white world, in a white household with white grandparents, went to a white school. And I thought I was kind and I was nice. And so I didn't have mean things to say about people of color. So that did not make me racist. But it also didn't mean that I stopped or did anything to help stop it. And it also means that I helped perpetuate it because I didn't help stop it. So this has been outstanding. Josue will allow you to, share a little bit about Gomo, how people can reach you. And, I'll pop it up on the screen as well. But tell us a little bit about that, and then we'll let Paul close us out.
Sure. If you would like to reach out to Gomo, it's www.gomoedservices.com. You can also reach us on our social media platforms. We're on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and we're about to be on LinkedIn, but it's all at Gomo EDS. On the social media platforms, our hashtag is the consistent across the board, hashtag #WhyGomo. The purpose is, if you're looking for great work and you're looking to work with an organization that's doing deep work that is going to support you and challenge you and help you grow, the question is, why Gomo? We're going to show you why not Gomo. So thank you, everyone.
Folks, I'll tell you what, I call him Pitbull. I call him Mr. Worldwide because he's everywhere. This guy's passionate about his work. He always delivers. I've been fortunate to sit in many of his sessions. And folks, today he did not disappoint. So StatusGrow Nation, listeners, viewers, we hope you enjoyed session number 2 of the StatusGrow podcast. Please be on the lookout for details about our upcoming session number 3, episode number 3, where we are going to continue to push growth the StatusGrow way. So, Corey, I thank you. Dr. Josue Falez, I thank you. We are honored to know you and work with you.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
All right, thank you for tuning in to episode 2. If you enjoyed this, please hit that like button and subscribe. Until then, follow the show on Twitter at _StatusGrow and your host, Paul O'Neill, at Paul O'Neill 1972 and Corey Radish at C Radish _WC.